Ever get that, like, shiver down your spine feeling? You know, when you realize the most ordinary thing can turn into a nightmare.
Definitely. It's like the floor drops out from under you.
That's what we're going to dig into today.
Yeah, tell me more.
The case of Ayoola Ajayi.
Right.
So he's this, like, totally normal-seeming computer specialist,
Right.
right? But then
Then.
he commits this horrific crime, and it makes you wonder, like, who are the people we think we know?
Exactly. It's a question that keeps coming up, right? You think you have someone figured out.
You guys shared some seriously intense stuff for this deep dive. A true crime podcast, transcript, articles, the works. So let's unpack this, shall we?
It's a case that grabs you, that's for sure. I mean, it's got everything. Online connections gone wrong, the whole forensic investigation side, and that question that just hangs there. The why.
It's like we're looking right into the darkest part of human nature. So let's start with Mackenzie Lueck. 23 years old, studying to be a nurse. June 2019, she's just trying to get back to Salt Lake City after her grandmother's funeral. Sends a quick text to her parents from the airport, just like anyone would.
And that tiny detail, that text, it becomes this huge piece of the puzzle.
Right.
It's a digital timestamp, like a breadcrumb in those last hours, and that's something investigators really zeroed in on.
It's kind of freaky when you think about it, how much our digital lives can tell, even when we don't want them to.
Yeah, it's like we're leaving a trail everywhere, whether we realize it or not.
Okay, so back to the investigation. Mackenzie's missing exams, totally off the grid, which is so not her.
And this is where understanding the context is really important. See, the University of Utah, where Mackenzie was a student, they'd already had count 'em, two student deaths in recent years.
Awful.
So people were already on edge. There was this current of anxiety even before this.
I bet. Imagine the fear just like spreading through the campus, the city,
Oh,
everyone.
oh, absolutely.
So the police, they're trying to put together a timeline, right? And they find this website, Seeking Arrangement.
Okay.
Now, for people who don't know, it connects sugar babies and sugar daddies.
Right. So it's this whole controversial thing. It's like a glimpse into this, this trend,
Yeah.
where money's part of the relationship deal.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's how Mackenzie and Ajayi's paths crossed.
It's like that becomes the key. The investigators, they use geolocation data, texts, even the website's own records. It all built this picture of what happened in those hours before Mackenzie disappeared.
He basically documented his own crimes.
In a way, yeah. At first, he completely denied even meeting Mackenzie.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
But the evidence, it told a very different story. And then things really escalated when the police got a warrant to search his place.
Oh.
They found Mackenzie's things there.
No.
And then, even worse, they found her remains, buried in his backyard.
Oh, God, that's awful. And to make it even scarier, they had a whole SWAT team there when they arrested Ajayi.
That tells you something right there. They thought he was armed, dangerous, the whole 9 yards. They weren't taking any chances.
It's like something out of a movie. You find a young woman's body in your backyard that's pretty damning,
Yeah.
even without DNA evidence.
And the evidence, it all pointed right at him. They matched his DNA to the crime scene. No question about it, he was involved.
It's just, I don't know, your mind goes to such a dark place. Like, what could have been going on there?
It really does, and it's like, you think it can't get worse, but it does. There's this whole other detail from the podcast that really got to me.
Okay.
Ajayi, he'd actually tried to get this secret room built in his house.
Like a hidden room?
Yeah, like straight out of a thriller. So according to the contractor he talked to, this room, it was supposed to be small, soundproof, hidden behind a bookshelf.
No way.
And get this, it was going to have one of those biometric fingerprint locks, like in spy movies.
Ah. Okay, that's not just some random DIY project. That's intense. It makes you think, what was he planning to use it for?
Right. It's a question that just hangs over everything.
Yeah.
Some people think maybe it was meant to be like a panic room, if things went bad.
To hide in?
Exactly. But others, they think it points to something much darker, like maybe he was planning more crimes.
And that's where things get even more disturbing because, and I don't know if you remember this from the podcast, but Ajayi had this history, right? Like he'd been charged with assaulting women before.
Yeah, there were those sexual assault and aggravated assault charges, totally separate cases.
Right, but then they dropped those charges as part of the plea deal for Mackenzie's case.
Which happens a lot, to be honest. The justice system, it tries to be efficient, so they focus on the most serious charge.
I get it, but it's still tough, Like, what about those other victims? Did they feel like they got justice?
That's the whole debate, isn't it? Some people say plea deals are necessary. They make things more certain, less messy than a trial. But then others say it's like making a deal with the devil. The victims don't always get their say.
It's complicated. But it makes you wonder, could things have been different? Could someone have stopped him before he hurt Mackenzie?
It's impossible to know for sure. But, an FBI profiler actually looked at this case and they said Ajayi showed some classic signs of a serial killer.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, it's chilling, like the way he planned everything, his history of violence, even that secret room. It all adds up.
So we've got this guy, he even worked at Goldman Sachs, for God's sake.
Okay.
But behind that, there's this whole other side.
It's like that saying, right? Evil often hides in plain sight. We think monsters have to look a certain way, act a certain way.
But sometimes they just blend in. And that's the scariest part of all. Speaking of scary, there's this one detail I keep thinking about. The podcast mentioned what Ajayi's first name means, Ayoola.
It means joy and wealth. In Yoruba, I think. It's such a stark contrast, right?
Right. This guy who caused so much pain, his name means joy. I don't know, it just makes you think.
Like maybe it's this reminder that people are complicated. We're all capable of good and bad. And sometimes you just can't judge a book by its cover, or a person by their name, I guess.
It's a lot to process. But you're right, people are complicated. And as much as we want easy answers, sometimes there just aren't any.
Exactly. And while we can't forget what Ajayi did, we have to remember Mackenzie. She had her whole life ahead of her, and that's what should be remembered.
It really is just heartbreaking. All that potential just gone. And for her family, well, I can't even imagine.
It's those moments in the podcast, when they played those excerpts from the sentencing, and you hear from Mackenzie's family.
Right.
It's a punch to the gut. You remember, this isn't just a story. These are real people living with this incredible loss.
And there's no making it right. No matter what happens in court, it can't bring her back. It makes you think about everyone affected. Mackenzie's family, her friends, even just people at the university. They've already been through so much with those other students who died.
It's like this collective trauma, on top of everything else. And those wounds, they take time to heal.
It's a lot. But if we can try to learn something from all this, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for you?
For me, it keeps coming back to how technology plays into it all. It's like this weird double-edged sword.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. It was Ajoy's phone, the dating app, all those digital trails. That's how they got him.
Oh, right. It's like he created a map right to his own front door.
Exactly. But it makes you think we put so much of ourselves out there online without even realizing it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's easy to forget that it's all trackable. Our location, what we look at online, all of it.
It's a good reminder, though, to be careful, to pay attention to what we're putting out there. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Always trust your gut.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Mackenzie Lueck's case. We've gone through the events, looked at how the investigation unfolded.
And talked about those difficult questions, online safety, digital evidence.
Definitely. It's a heavy one for sure. But that's what these deep dives are for, right? To learn, to discuss, and to remember.
Absolutely. And to hope that by talking about these things, maybe, just maybe, we can prevent them from happening again.
I hope so too. Until next time, everyone, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe out there.